what's the difference between sort of buy and hold and waiting for the market to pick up versus buy, hold, and the risk of development? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think the important thing is that buy and hold is great. And so we're not saying that don't do buy and hold. The idea is that the next step of buy and hold is to buy, hold, and develop. And it would be great to understand this with numbers. And so if you assume that, there are, say, two people, and in both these scenarios, you're talking about four properties, and each property is worth, say, $500,000. In the first scenario, we are talking about a person with a $2 million portfolio, and a second person, we are talking about a property portfolio of 1.5 million plus that extra 500 that they are going to use in the development. Okay. And so if you look at, the Australian average growth of, say, 6% across the years of, say, 10 years, you're talking about a portfolio value of person A, which goes from 2 million to 3.6 million. Okay. Assuming at a deposit of, say, 20%, they would have an equity growth of roughly around $1.6 million, which you take away and understand from cash on cash perspective, you're talking about 30% cash on cash. Okay. Great. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. The important thing in this scenario with this person is that, the five properties that they're acquiring, or the four properties that they're acquiring, are all selected the right way. And so they're all delivering the returns that we are talking about. Okay. Now, if we take that example and assume in the person's B scenario where they're transitioning into property development, all they're doing is they're still doing buy and hold for three properties, but they are using one of the extra properties to push developments on it and create that extra amount of chunky cash coming back to them. And we know that an average development, when you look at the profits, you would be looking at absolute profit of $200,000 to $250,000 bare minimum on a smallest possible deal, right? Because for deal to be worthwhile, that is the sort of money that you would be generating. And so if we assume the same scenario of 6% yield over 10% or over 10 years, what we are talking about is the 30% cash on cash on the first three properties. But the beautiful thing that happens with that extra money that you generate, say 200 to 250,000 every 2 years, for example, if they're doing that development every 2 years, that provides an extra $800,000 on top of the overall scenario that they have. And so in this scenario, particularly, their overall portfolio gains comes to almost like $2.9 million. Okay, double the wealth compared to the same person who is doing buy and hold. Right? Okay, and so all you're doing is you're absorbing little bit of risk while pushing your net equity or net growth on super steroids. And we're not talking about developers who are doing this on a regular basis. We're not talking about developers who are scaling themselves from $250,000 developments to $2 million developments as they grow their portfolio quite on the development side. And so that's the idea is to do it safely and consistently when it comes to development, right? It's not so much about, oh, I do one development and I don't do anything, right?
Yeah. And so and again, the conditions are obviously make sure you do your numbers, not all the time. It's not always that you're going to hit 250,000 in each deal and so on. So, all these are conservative and we're just creating scenarios, but it's more to be able to say, hey, you can leverage without it being a huge risk exposure to you as well.
Definitely.
Particularly if you're looking at properties where you've got an existing property, you might renovate the front and then develop a duplex up the back or something like that. You still have an asset. You still have an asset and a value of the existing property. So, there are various levels of risk exposure when you're doing development, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're knocking down everything and starting from scratch. So it is more going, okay, what is your risk appetite? How do you manage that risk? And then be able to ensure that you've got great returns that come out of it. If you are so inclined to want to move from a more passive investor to a more active investor /
100%. And you would see people arguing, right? And I hear this question all the time when people say that, oh, if I would have done the development or if I would have held the property for the same amount of time, I would have made the same amount of money. And that talks to the
Mm.
core of the question or the answer that you're talking about, that you haven't educated yourself, you haven't done the development properly, you haven't done it so that you can exactly know what a development profit and a growth profit looks like. And so if you're doing the development numbers properly and understand the development, as your development profit should be exponential or on top of whatever the growth profit should look like. And so it comes back to making sure that you understand what you're doing, you do that level of due diligence, you understand the risks, you protect your margins on the developments, etc., making sure that you're doing it safely and not taking excessive risk. And so it comes down
Yeah.
to, yes, you can create generational wealth, you can build a secondary business, you can kill the dependency on the serviceability, you can have a business that can travel generations for your kids, etc. But you
Mm,
can't
mm.
discount the risks that comes with these transition, right?